Welcome back to another episode of the Born Again podcast. I'm Katie.
And I'm Joe.
And today is really exciting because it's our first ever guest, our first ever interview. Mm-hmm. And we are in St. Paul, Minnesota, and we are interviewing Kendra. And she is a therapist and she deals with religious trauma. So thank you so much for being here, Kendra.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here with you guys.
Yeah, we're so excited for this conversation. So we want to talk to you about your religious background, you know, everything. I don't know if you would call it a deconstruction or just how you happened to come from, you know, being religious to being a therapist. And so I want to know first, like, your background in religion.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in North Dakota, small town, USA, and was raised in an evangelical free church.
And what is evangelical free?
It's part of the non-denominational branch, but it's part of the Evangelical Free Church of America.
Okay, so it's like a type of churches.
Yep.
Like, okay.
Yep. And so was pretty actively involved in that. And one of the things that is maybe a little unique about my experience is my parents actually in college were a part of a cult and left a cult and then joined this evangelical free church, and which is where I was raised. But they obviously have had a lot of trauma of their own and never really felt like a part of this community. So it was just a place holder, a place for my family to go to church on Sundays. But it wasn't like I didn't grow up in a very fundamentalist home or an indoctrinated home. It was something that I chose later on myself.
Interesting.
Yeah, which is very interesting. Yeah. It fits with my personality a little bit more.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would say I had this massive trauma when I was in 4th grade. My hometown flooded and we were evacuated in the middle of the night and left like the safety and comfort of my, fourth grade world and had a really traumatic experience joining a school in another town.
Okay.
And my mom looks back on that time and says, like, that was when your little light went out.
Aww. That's so sad.
Yeah.
It breaks my heart to hear that.
For little Kendra. Yes, it makes me want to cry.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
But yeah, so that experience, I really look back and that's what I pinpoint as this significant point in my life where I was searching on an unconscious level for a sense of belonging because I had for the first time ever, this big experience of not belonging.
Right.
And so I came back, started, a few years later, started middle school and made a shift in my friends to being really closely connected with some friends that I made at church. And it was really in middle school and early high school where I started to become like the super Christian.
Okay.
Just because I found so much belonging and identity there and a box or a framework in which I could excel and be the best.
Right.
And, there were rules to fit into.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where I got super, super involved in religion. And my parents never really fostered that. They, were supportive, but it was totally on my own choice.
Okay, so you kind of like jumped ahead of your family in a sense. Like you dove in head first.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my parents, in recent years we've had discussions around this. They actually said, we would have left that church a long time ago had you not been involved in it. We didn't want to take you away from this like beautiful, what they saw was beautiful community and place of belonging for me, which that has some mixed feelings for me because kind of came at the expense of my siblings. So I was like full on in, super Christian, going to everything. I'm trying to think of some missions trips and SEMP. Are you familiar with SEMP?
No, what's that?
It was basically this summer training program down at Wheaton where you would basically learn how to evangelize and proselytize people. Okay. So we'd go into Chicago and do that.
Wow.
Okay.
Yep. A couple of missions trips and, basically I say this now. At the time, it was very, very genuine for me.
Yeah.
But I was, like, using quotes, really, really good at being a good Christian.
Yeah.
And that was a major part of my identity, and I felt like I had arrived.
Yeah.
So naturally, a part of that is I wanted to go into ministry. And so I was looking around for how to, like, continue on in this path of being a really big part of the Christian church. And so I decided to go to Bible school, and I went to Moody Bible Institute, which is in downtown Chicago, and had an amazing time there, actually.
Yeah.
Met some of my best friends. I actually met my husband there.
Nice.
And
are you so close with your friends that you made there?
Some of them. Yeah, some of them. My best friend that I made there, we're still very close.
Cool.
Still married to my partner.
Yeah.
Which we can talk about too. So that was a really positive experience looking back on it. Kind of when things started to fall apart for me, looking back, I would say there were signs all the way through that pieces didn't fit. Like, I was never good at evangelizing. It really felt very uncomfortable in my heart and my like spirit, and
I understand that.
Yeah. But it was like, oh shit, this is what I have to do.
Yeah, you have to do it.
I have to at least pretend like I'm good at it.
Yeah. Right. Well, it's weird too. I don't know if you experienced, but like feeling like it feels good to evangelize in a certain sense, because one part of my brain is like, yes, you're doing something really good. But the other part of me is like, oh, this is not easy. And this feels really unnatural.
Exactly.
A real dichotomy.
Exactly. Yes. Which I think is a good statement for a lot of our experiences. Probably.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so it started to kind of really break down for me. I went overseas and did an internship over in Portugal, and was working with a youth minister out there. And some pretty traumatic things happened while I was over there, and I was totally alone. And I came back to the States and had what I can only describe as like a mental breakdown. I was super, super depressed and was having panic attacks like daily. At the time was my boyfriend, who's now my husband, Josh, came out to see me.
Yeah.
And I was like, please break up with me. I'm crazy. I have no idea what's going on. Like, I had no language for what I was experiencing.
Yeah.
That's so terrifying.
Yes.
I've experienced that as well. That's a really good way to think about it, actually. Like, it gives me compassion for the times when I had no language for things. Yeah.
Exactly. So, my parents basically drug me back for my senior year to Moody, and I'm glad I went back, but I was horrifically depressed and anxious.
Yeah.
And I think it was some of these experiences that I had in Portugal and being alone, and part of it was that I was witness to this major discrepancy between professed faith and people's actions.
Okay.
And I remember thinking, like, what the hell? Like, if this is what it's about, I don't want anything to do with it.
Yeah.
But I just didn't have any language or really any space to explore that.
Yeah.
Because I'm heading into my senior year of a ministry school.
Right.
Planning to go into full-time ministry.
Yeah.
So I came back and I got on some medication, which was really helpful in like getting me back into school. And then I started seeing a therapist on campus, and that was actually an extremely traumatizing experience for me. Very, very shaming and blaming. I only saw this person once, and I then met with a couple other therapists until I landed with this one that I worked with for a number of years, and she was really amazing. And so basically, that's where really things started to get challenging for me as far as I couldn't make sense of my emotional space or I had a big disconnect between my intellectual knowledge and my heart and my body's reaction. But I just kind of kept trucking along, and, because I felt like I was indoctrinated to turn off any cues to those other ways of knowing. So like knowledge center in your heart, or knowledge center in your gut, in your body system. And so Josh and I got married, and we moved out to Denver, and we went to graduate school. And so he was working full-time at a ministry, and I was working for an engineering firm. Okay. And we both were super involved at this church that he grew up in. Wow. And he was working full-time there. And basically, almost towards the end of our first year of marriage, we had a really, really horrific, traumatizing experience in that church. So the church that he was raised in and we were serving in, and where all of our community was formed. His boss essentially systematically, over the period of about maybe even a year, was isolating him from the rest of the leadership team and spreading lies about Josh.
What in the world?
And myself. I think he just was really, I think he had a lot of shame and a lot of insecurity. Yeah. And was threatened by Josh. And I think they were threatened by us as a couple. Yeah. So yeah, there was a ton of lies spread about us that we didn't know about until about maybe 2 years after.
Oh my gosh.
But calling into question like our marriage and my mental health and Josh's mental health. And so basically kind of where things came to a head is we were told, Josh was told by this boss, we're not going to renew your position. And it's because you're not called to ministry.
Oh, so he just decided.
Yeah. And as you can imagine, that language is very, very abusive and powerful.
Yeah, no kidding.
So this is a couple that we were really good friends with and pretty significant people in our lives. And being newly married, I was like, what the hell? Who did I marry? Right. But at the same time, it was not a satisfying answer, because we were like, what do you mean he's not called to ministry?
Right. Yeah. Like, how can you be so certain about
how
that?
How do you know?
Yeah.
Exactly. And so we would push back on that. And, the response Josh would get was, you're just not passionate about programming, or you're not passionate about like organizing events or things like that. So basically, people were using this guy was using spiritual language, religious language, to kind of lay down, an ace card, and basically win the hand. Yeah. And so, it was awful. I mean, there's so many details that I don't need to go into, but that was really the pivotal point where I was like, this is so fucked up. Yeah. This is couldn't be further from what the teachings of Jesus are. Yeah. And we lost our entire community. Oh. So this couple had gone around and really, kind of poisoned all of the wells of these relationships that we had with everybody. We did have two couples that kind of stayed closely connected to us, because we had shared with them all that was happening all along. But we really wanted to like take the higher road and not do what this person was doing to us.
Yeah. Like spreading rumors or
or even really engaging in it. Yeah. Because we at the time believed like the truth will come out, and we just were waiting for that. And so that started a multiple year process of, we stayed at that church for quite a while because we were like, we have nothing to hide, we have nothing to run away from, and hopefully the truth will come out. Well, eventually it just became way too painful to even be in that space. I
was gonna say, I would imagine that would have been really hard. Even if you are choosing to take the high road, it'd be really hard to just exist in that community with all that stuff going on below the surface.
Especially like where you feel like people should be most loving and accepting. That's got to be the hardest place to experience that kind of thing.
Like so betrayed.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
And just confusing. I mean,
Yeah.
You know, we had, like I've said this a couple times, we had no language for it.
Right.
And no space to go where we felt we could get support or counsel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And nobody's prepared for that.
No.
I mean, it's the weirdest situation. And
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah.
So you said that you were there for 2 years after that point?
You know, maybe like a year and a half.
Okay. Yeah.
Where we were super inconsistent. And then Josh started applying for other ministry jobs. And eventually we never went back into ministry just because every, you know, place he would be a candidate at, it just was like, we can't do this. Like, the more we would try to get back into it, the more it felt so painful and like we didn't belong.
Yeah.
So we just, you know, kind of took a pause on the ways that we had expressed ourselves spiritually.
Yeah.
And that felt really good. And meanwhile, during this whole time, we're both in graduate school. And I'm also doing a postgraduate training program specializing in experiential couples and family therapy at the same time. So I'm meeting all these amazing people from all walks of life and all different faith identities and being totally embraced and loved and celebrated.
Yeah.
What an opposite. Yeah.
Yes. It was, but honestly, one of the biggest gifts for me because it was the first time in my whole life where I really had friendships, deep friendships with people that didn't share the same beliefs as me.
Sure.
And who were completely accepting of my entire being.
Yeah.
And
how refreshing.
Yeah.
yes, yes, it was honestly like mind blowing.
Yeah.
I remember sitting in our like intern room with two of my best friends and thinking, oh my gosh, like who never have identified as Christians. I remember looking at them and thinking to myself, like, I am experiencing God through you.
Yeah.
Like, how do I make sense of
Yes.
What do you do with that? Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, that was approaching 9 years ago when everything hit the fan.
Okay.
So we stayed out in Denver for 8 more years and, you know, went through our own therapy individually as well as a couple, really processing through the trauma of losing not only our faith system and all of this sense of knowing, but losing our entire community and our entire identity.
Yeah.
And losing Josh's passion.
Yeah. Right.
And his what he thought was his kind of calling and purpose.
That's everything.
Yes.
Losing like so much.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now you got to go through this together.
We did.
So like
yeah.
I feel like that is such a blessing. I don't have any other better word to describe that, but that's amazing. Did you talk about it together, like as you were going through it? Like, but you said you didn't really have language in the beginning to describe what you were feeling. Did you have like a time when you started talking about that together more?
Yeah. You know, we didn't totally experience our deconstruction process at the same time. I remember coming to Josh one day and we were sitting at our dining room table and, you know, it took like all the courage in my body to say, I don't think I believe in hell anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't believe in like, I don't believe that there's really only one expression of love. Like I think my friends who identify as lesbian are experiencing the same type of love that, you know, God wishes for everyone.
Yeah.
I remember saying that to him and he was at a little bit of a different point, but one of the biggest gifts I think for the two of us is not necessarily that we came out on the other side together, but that we created space for each other to be at whatever point in our grief process and in the transition that we were, because we weren't lined up. And now we are now, but you know, even our faith, even our spiritual practices that were building now are looking different.
Sure.
But yeah, we created these spaces where we would check in, and we would most of the time be at different levels, but knowing that we were okay with that difference.
Yeah. Oh,
it didn't have to be kind of the point at which our relationship had to dissolve.
Yeah. And do you feel like that was how your guys' relationship always was? Or, while you were both Christian, did you feel maybe more, not sure how to say it, like
rigid?
Yeah, rigid. Or were you always kind of free to disagree in your relationship, so to speak?
That's a great question. And I appreciate you asking that, because I get to brag on my husband a little bit. Because honestly, I think he's the one that created that space from the beginning in our relationship.
Okay.
When we met at Moody or were dating or, newly engaged, I was very rigid.
Yeah.
And in pretty classic complementarian beliefs about roles and my place, and Josh has never been about that. I mean, I remember us getting in major fights around him being the spiritual leader of our family and him saying no, Kendra, you are an equal participant. And I'm like, no, I'm not. Which is, I laugh at it, but it's deeply troubling to
us. Yes. How bizarre. I
held that.
Yeah. We relate to that too.
Yeah.
I feel like we were really emotionally attached in an unhealthy way, where there was these really rigid roles, and
you want to be obedient to God because that's your purpose, and so you're not even noticing how harmful the rules are. And
blinded by
even him being so loving and saying that to you, that love is not as important as you following or obeying these rules. I don't know.
That's well said.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, that's great that he was able to be that way, hold that space for you.
Yeah. I mean, I think had I been partnered with somebody else, I don't know how that would have gone.
Right.
I know.
He's always held tension around his beliefs, and what does he say? He calls himself it's I was always a rebel at Moody, and he was in some of these quintessential ways. So I really think he was the one that allowed us to transition into this deconstruction and grief process and not lose our connection. And in fact, it has deepened and heightened our level of emotional intimacy and connection as a couple that I never thought was possible.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Actually, moving away from belief.
Yeah. Right.
That's amazing. I love how you said that you were able to give each other space, and even in that early time, I don't think we knew that we needed to give each other space. And I think that's something that I'm still learning, that when you really love someone, you let them in a way figure it out on their own, give them space to grow or just collect their thoughts instead of trying to force you to be the same in the same place. And I don't know, that could be encouraging for people who are going through this at different times with their spouse, and they want to stay together and they're trying to move together.
Yeah. Well, it's really terrifying. It was really terrifying for us, and we hear it's really terrifying for a lot of other people who are in a relationship when one person starts to doubt or one person starts to think a little bit differently about something. At least from our experience as Christians, that would be a really unusual thing to happen, where one of the Christian spouses starts to think a little differently about something. Then it's whoa, we were supposed to both be equally yoked here, on the exact same page, moving together step by step at the exact same time.
We just don't learn how to love people we disagree with.
Yeah.
I think we learn that we love people who agree exactly with us.
Right.
And especially growing up in your parents and whatever God says you need to be an equal match. Equally yoked.
Right.
And it's it's hard. Even now I'm realizing it's difficult for me to love people who disagree with me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really beautiful.
That's interesting. That's cool that you learn to do that with each other.
Yeah.
I have to give him all the credit, to be honest. So he developed the skill of critical thinking.
Yeah.
I did not.
Right.
I mean, I have now done that as a late 20-year-old.
Yeah.
And I think it really is in line with what you just said, Katie, about, we weren't given permission or taught how to love people who hold difference. And that's a lack of that's a major lack in skills around critical thinking.
Yeah. And how bizarre that you have to develop that like so late on. I mean, even us, you know, it's you end up feeling like, oh my gosh, I should have learned this as a child, you know.
Right.
It's hard to like, I don't know, feel confident again, but you like, or give yourself compassion, I guess. You know, learning that stuff so late.
Yeah.
But exactly, it's a thing. So let's go back to when you started getting into therapy, and what made you want to go to school to become a therapist?
Yeah, well, when I was at Moody, I was a family ministries major, which doesn't exist anymore, but I was the last one to graduate.
You were?
Nice.
Yeah, it was that title, and it basically was like pre-counseling.
Okay.
So what did it was my experience with my therapist in Chicago. Her name was Linda, and she was really transformative for me.
Yeah.
And really, I can look back and say she was a big part of the beginning stages of my deconstruction.
Okay.
Wow.
Really helping me sit in tension and the gray and the ambiguity.
Yeah.
Very accepting. And so it was my relationship with her that made me realize I want to sit in the sacred and beautiful space with somebody else or with couples or families that I've experienced with her.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
Yeah.
And what a testament to her. I mean,
Yeah,
I would imagine if
inspiring.
she heard that, how encouraged, you know, she would feel by that. That's really cool.
Yeah, she's pretty amazing.
So was she like a secular therapist then?
You know, that's a good question.
Because I would have thought, as like you were obviously super Christian when you were going to Moody, and at least from my perspective, when I was super Christian, if I would have ever had troubles, I would have made sure like my therapist has got to be really Christian too. You know,
I don't want to speak for her beliefs, but I do think that she, at the very least, she could totally hold space and use the language that I was using. I do think that she did identify as a Christian, but she wasn't rigid. And I found her through a friend who was also going to Moody, who was going to see her. I don't remember how they connected, but at the very minimum, she had compassion and love for the values that I had, and could really support me in that.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So then I knew I wanted to be a therapist, and I went to seminary, Denver Seminary, and got a master's in clinical mental health counseling. And it really wasn't until everything happened with our church that I knew I wanted to do secular counseling. Prior to that, I didn't want to be a biblical counselor, but I wanted to counsel within the church. And I actually thought that I wanted to provide therapy resources to missionaries when they were coming off the field. As you know, there's a lot of trauma that happens.
I can see
in
that being a need,
experience too. But it was that whole experience of having our own trauma and losing our community, losing everything, and simultaneously being exposed to all these other people who were the antithesis of what I was experiencing in the church. And that's what led me to want to start my own practice and really specialize and focus on treating trauma.
Wow. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's really amazing. Cool.
So did you do any therapy with missionary families before? Were you a therapist at that point, or were you doing any work during graduate school with like Christian couples at all?
I didn't do any work with missionaries, not that I'm remembering. My memory may fail me, but in graduate school, we did provide therapy out of a clinic that the school put on that was faith-based. So we were working through a kind of a faith lens. And at the same time, I did my internship at the Denver Family Institute, which is where I was getting exposed to all these other people. So I was providing faith-based counseling and then non-faith-based counseling in another arena.
Yeah.
I feel like I had counseling with someone who was doing their internship, who was in graduate school like going through that similar like experience, like through the university, I guess, in Portland.
Yeah, that was kind of your first like introduction to any
like
kind
a
of...
real, like more of a real counselor.
Yeah.
My first one was traumatic, like you said, where she was shaming and
Yeah.
just made me feel like I shouldn't have had the problems I have, you know,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Oh,
So it is like really difficult, like you said, to find a therapist, because the process of like shopping for someone or just interviewing someone to see if they're going to be a good fit for you is very vulnerable. You're sharing like your personal problems and seeing if they're going to be able to help or listen or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and even for me, I feel like it took a long time for me to get to the point where I even realized, or where I could accept the fact that I needed outside help.
Yes.
So like when you're saying the first therapist you went to ended up being really traumatic for you, how did you keep your motivation? Like after that first really traumatic experience, I would imagine you were really disheartened by that. What kept you searching for a new one, I guess?
Well, I was just desperate.
Okay.
I mean, it was, I wasn't experiencing suicidal ideation, but it was kind of really, really, really intense.
Yeah.
To the point where I didn't want to get out of bed. I had no energy, no passion. And I think a part of it too was having that experience myself of struggling with mental health and realizing through conversation with my family that everyone in my family can relate to that. It was like, I don't know, it was something about the fact that gave me permission to know it didn't happen in a vacuum, and that it wasn't like because of a lack of belief. You know, I had experiences like being shamed by that therapist with friends at Moody, where I came back and was, talking about how I was doing and was met with, well, you need to pray more and you need to trust in God for Him to heal you. And it's like, that's what I was doing.
Right.
And,
Of course.
Yeah.
You would know to do that.
I tried that.
Yeah. So it's, the potential for people to be continually re-traumatized is really, really pervasive.
Yeah.
And, so I think I just had my family's permission. My parents were really encouraging me to get support, and my husband, was doing the same thing. And and I did have a couple friends at Moody that one of my friends, her mom was a therapist and was like very supportive of me.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So I had little beacons of light.
Okay.
But this lady just, she pissed me off originally. And I think I was so angry that I wanted to spite her. Almost.
Like find a way better personality.
Yeah, I'm going to show you. I'm not the cause of my issues.
Yes, that's such a good motivator.
Yeah, right.
Which anger is not something that I experience a lot, but I was so mad.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she said horrible things to me and about my family, and it's like, you don't even know me.
No.
Right.
So,
I'm sorry. Yeah. It's the last thing you want when you go to a therapist.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the worst possible thing.
Yeah.
And I think she was probably, I really believe that people are trying to do their best for the most part, not intending to harm, but the problem is when we don't give ourselves enough space to actually evaluate what we believe and what is a congruent manifestation of that in our words and our actions, we cause so much harm.
Yeah, right.
And that community didn't allow for that type of introspection.
So you now, fast forward a couple of years, you start working with people who have gone through religious trauma, and did you have to make a conscious effort to kind of start that, or did it just sort of naturally come about that you started working with clients who were dealing with that?
Yeah, so before I moved to the Twin Cities, I lived in Denver for a while, like I mentioned, and that's where I actually started my clinical practice.
Okay.
And it mostly started working with adoptees and their families. Okay. And over time, I just started getting more and more people coming to me who identified as Christian, but were struggling with some sort of incongruence or discrepancy within their experience of their faith system.
Yeah.
And So that's really where those conversations started to happen. And they were happening simultaneously, and maybe even before that, with my own therapist that I've been working with for, 6 or 7 years, who really has helped me go through this whole process.
Yeah.
So I started noticing it and, reflecting back, like, I love talking about this, and I love supporting people around figuring out what they actually believe and what feels congruent to them. And so I never marketed for that out in Denver, or never really made it known that that's what I did. It just was naturally kind of coming to me. But then when I moved out here, just felt like I think this is what I feel most passionate about, and I really want to provide a space for people along the whole spectrum of people who have had adverse religious experiences. I want to create a space where they can process that and land wherever they want. So it has moved into more of a really targeted place of practice for myself. Within the last year and a half.
Okay. So do you feel like you obviously went through a bunch of trauma with your like Christian experiences and coming out of that? Do you feel like that's kind of transitioned into something that is sort of an asset in a way to your practice now?
That's a great question. I think it is an asset. What's coming up for me is like I do think it's an asset, and I think I've done a lot of work in my own story around my own grief process. So I no longer feel like I'm angry. And I'm not in a space of anger or hatred towards the people that harmed my husband and I, or the loss of relationships, or the loss of all my ideals, which is a grief in and of itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And because I feel like I've moved into this place of compassion, and I'm always doing my own work too, so that I feel like it is mostly an asset. And I find that a lot of clients really like that I can speak that language and I know it on a personal level. And really my whole goal is about helping people tap into their own personal intuition and to their authentic self and find ways to live out of that in whatever way that means to them.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That can be in a faith system, or it can be outside of the faith system. I'm not about at all being anti-belief or anti-faith. I think that's a deep part of being human. But I'm anti-dogma and anti people losing parts of themselves and their voice and their essence.
Well, that's amazing.
Yeah, because that's a big part of coming out of Christianity, for us at least, like finding our voice, our authentic self, and trusting that person. I think that's maybe the biggest step we had to take, or the first one that we had to take. And when we were in that place, you feel hopeless because you don't even have, like you said, the language to understand that you don't have that, because you think that you do. You do.
Right. Well, it's weird I feel like when we first started going through this, it's like you realize that you've lost parts of yourself. The first thing, while I was Christian, I never realized that there were parts of me that weren't being expressed, or that I've been pushing down for years or whatever. And so those first moments of kind of awakening to that, like, oh my gosh, I just realized I don't have a personality, or like, I've been shoving things down forever, was shocking. And then feels so overwhelming when you don't have any idea how to come back from that. And so, that sounds like the work you're doing is amazing.
Thank you.
What other kinds of themes have you noticed in therapy with religious people? Or like, maybe what are some ways that you can, I don't know, I think like when people become aware of maybe some of the things that have been hurting them, it's like really helpful to just at least notice that. That happened for me, like just noticing something. And have you noticed any like common themes with people that you worked with?
Yeah, I think it's such a big spectrum. Some people, and I use that language of adverse religious experiences because I feel that it's really encompassing of all the different language that people identify with. I have quite a lot of people that come to work with me and they don't identify with religious trauma, that term.
Okay.
But I was harmed in a religious experience. It feels good to them, or spiritual abuse feels good to them, or none of that, but I've had an adverse religious experience.
Okay. Yeah. That's really interesting, because I think I relate to that, because we'll read online about other people's stories and how they've come out of religion or how they've been negatively affected, and some people can easily say, like, yeah, I had religious trauma, or I had trauma in this. But for me, for whatever reason, that it was really hard for me to even admit that.
No,
I don't know.
Me too.
Yeah,
I
something about, like,
it seems
my
like
experience wasn't that bad.
It seemed, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that's interesting. And kind of calling it an adverse religious experience, I can say, like, yeah, definitely
Definitely yes.
had that.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, that trauma word seems like hard for me to relate to that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think that's part of our culture's language around trauma. A lot of people categorize it in classic PTSD symptoms and, like an experience of a veteran. Somebody who's been in a war zone. And trauma really is based on the individual's experience of whatever happened to them, and it's the physiological response that the body has to being overwhelmed and threatened. So I think part of it is that I don't think collectively as a society we really understand trauma. And what do I want to say about that? I agree with you. I struggled with claiming trauma myself, and I think what I wanted to say is we tend to categorize it like, oh, mine wasn't as bad as X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
And the reality is it really is up to, the experiencer.
Sure. There's no scale, like a universal scale.
Yes. What's traumatizing? Now there are physiological signs of the body's overwhelm. So I do see some of that, where people come in and, they're having difficulty exploring their sexual expression or sexual pleasure, or they have panic attacks related to certain words or being in a church building. And those are traumatic symptoms of the body's overwhelm of something that felt threatening. But so I like this umbrella term because it feels encompassing. It feels like it doesn't cause us to say, oh, Joe, your experience was worse than mine, therefore it's more valid. Because it's all three of our experiences are valid because it's our experience. And so I see a whole spectrum of people around issues that have some touch point to adverse religious experiences, and it could be around sexuality, gender expression, what else? Body dysmorphia, eating disorders. I do a lot of work with people around lack of intuition and lack of voice, and feeling like they have complete disconnect from about their shoulders down. So their experience might have been, I really felt like I totally understood myself on an intellectual level inside the church because my church asked me to disconnect from my heart knowledge and my body knowledge. And so I do a lot of somatic body work around, let's re-tap into these two sources of knowledge, which are equally and maybe even more important than our intellectual space of knowing.
So what, just as a quick thing, what does that body work look like? I've heard that term before, people talking about body work or breath work or whatever. And so what is an example of like body work?
Well, there's lots of, like you said, there's lots of different ways to go about that. I am trained in something called EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is a whole protocol, a whole therapy. And really it helps people integrate and categorize traumatic experiences through all of their senses. So it doesn't ask somebody to process trauma on an intellectual level, but rather on an emotional and bodily level.
Wow.
Okay.
And a big part of that is resourcing, which is a lot of guided meditations, mindfulness. I'm actually asking people to, through focusing on the breath, to find a spot in their body that may feel really powerful.
Yeah.
And then we do visualizations around growing that, or a part that feels really wounded or really small, like a inner child work.
Yeah.
And we're then bringing in strong, loving, wise figures to attend to that part.
Yeah.
So I help people kind of wake up to their heart and their body in all different ways, but a lot of it is based around mindfulness and visualizations and just noticing. So that's, just tapping into the sensations of their body that they have tuned out for so long.
Okay.
But there's somatic experiencing and somatic processing and, other body work.
Yeah. Okay.
That sounds amazing.
I know.
Let's sign up.
I know. So
it's everything that we love, learning about.
Yeah. It's cool. It's just cool hearing about that because I feel like we have such a clear firsthand experience of that. At least me, especially, I think, being really disconnected from my own intuition. And the last few years have been a process of learning some of this stuff, and even just noticing when, I have a pang of something in my stomach. I don't know what that is, but making it a point to stop and notice there's something there, and then eventually, moving on to, okay, what is that? Where's that coming from? All that.
Yeah, to not dismiss it.
Yeah.
It's push it down.
So interesting to me. All this stuff is. Yeah, that's cool.
Absolutely.
It feels like a branch of knowledge that was hidden from us for so long.
Yeah.
And hearing you talk about it, and just that you studied it in school, and just hearing other people talk about it, sometimes I feel like, wow, this was withheld, these helpful things. And, I struggle with that feeling of missing out for a large part of my life. I don't know that I yet have dealt with anger or resentment from that, but it's also, I have to think of it as it's amazing that this is, in a way, I think it's led me to discover that there is help, and that there will always be more and more to learn. Because I don't think that I could, even if I wouldn't have gone through this experience, I wouldn't have been a perfect person. There would have been other things. And it's just it's amazing now to just discover all of this stuff.
Right.
I feel like I was searching for it for so long, some kind of help in the church that I never got, and always thought it was me.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think it's amazing that someone like you exists, and a job like this exists. It's
I feel really lucky.
I want to cry. It's amazing to find
really
it.
Cool. Yeah. So how, in your mind, I don't know if you'll have an answer to this, but so for somebody who went through a lot of trauma, and let's just say religious trauma, since that's what we talk about,
adverse religious
experiences. Yeah. So
you can use religious.
I like that though. I want to use it more.
We're not allowed to use it. What in your mind would be a successful growing out of that trauma? Kind of is there a destination in your mind for someone who came from a hard religious trauma background? Where are they headed? Does that make sense?
That's an awesome question. And, I think one of the things that I am very, very passionate about is helping people not re-traumatize themselves. I don't I want to rewind that. Not re-traumatizing themselves, but have the experience of being re-traumatized. And so I really, basically what I want to say is I don't think that there's one path.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's one therapeutic modality. I don't think there's a specific type of therapist you need to see. I mean, I think seeing somebody that has extensive training around trauma and can tap into bodywork would be really important. But, we were told for so long that there was one way and a path to get to an arrival point.
Yeah.
And that is a really common theme with people who are leaving any sort of indoctrinating community. And so I'm very passionate about saying, I deeply believe there is not one arrival point.
Yeah. Okay.
But what came up for me when you asked was, I think people coming into themselves.
Yeah.
And being able to say, like, this is who I am, and unapologetically, authentically, this is who I am and what I stand for and my values, and I've found a way to live out of that.
Yeah.
So no longer any piece of myself is hidden or in isolation or rejected by me or a community I'm a part of.
Amazing.
But that looks really different for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of, myself included, for a lot of people I work with, the propensity when you come out of a religious system is to do one of two things. Find another community that actually replicates the trauma, or to become the leader.
Oh,
wow.
And because it's kind of that pendulum swing, but you also swing to something that you know, which is indoctrinating really rigid spaces. Not everybody does that, but I did. Like the third time I recognized it, it was like, oh shit, like I have such a propensity to come to a place of submission and lose myself, even though these other places were not even religious. But that like pull to be a part of something bigger where I can like turn off my brain is so ingrained.
Wow. Yeah.
That like, that is one of the things that I am most passionate about, is like, I tell people when I meet with them the first time, I deeply believe, even on an unconscious level, that you know where you need to go.
Yeah.
Because I do. Whatever you want to say, soul or spirit or source within you, when we can tap into that, like, you will know where you need to go. I don't know that.
Yeah.
I'm just here to help you tap into it and hold the light while you're feeling around for it.
Right.
Like you have that inner knowledge.
Yes.
Like only you can know where you need to go.
Yeah.
Yes.
We experienced swinging. We still probably do, but that's such a byproduct of having that set of rules and that rigidity, is that you come out and wanting to find another group to be a part of, and trying to ask myself, am I, locking myself down? I don't, like looking for ways that I'm putting myself in a box of any kind, or like, I don't know, but it's difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really difficult. I found myself having a really hard time being okay with not having rigid answers to things. Like even as you're saying, maybe there's 1,000 different ways, 1,000 different paths that people can take, from coming from bad religious experiences to like full embodied living within themselves. But for me, coming out of religion, especially right away, my tendency was to try to grasp onto something that was very black and white and very rigid and like very clear guidelines. This is how you do this, and this is how you do this, and this is a new way to live, and all of that. So for us, it's been a process of continually checking ourselves, like, oh, wait a second, we're getting like a little bit too deep into this new way of thinking. Like, let's zoom out again and just like kind of take a breath and double check.
Wow.
Let's try not to get involved in any new cults.
Right. But seriously though, I mean, like I can understand how people come out of religion and then either join a new religion or even become, I want to say, like dogmatic atheists, because that's a real draw. You come from one black and white system of thinking and you kind of just want to jump into a different one that feels different from the last one, but like the fundamental structure of it's kind of the same. Yeah. That's a weird tendency, I guess, we have as just humans.
Well, I mean, I think it's also particularly strong when, the impacts of adverse religious experiences really vary depending on when you were a part of that community. But, specifically those early elementary years is when our brain is really wired to think in black and white. And it's kind of where our development stops. So like, I think you both grew up in the church. So we all grew up in the church and really had pretty significant developmental impacts from being a part of that community that would look really different from a friend who joined when they were 22. And they have space where they occupied it becomes one of those templates that can rise up, and we always have to constantly check ourselves, like you said, Jeff.
So why don't we talk about a little bit how you counsel couples and how your religious trauma background plays into that, and couples who are going through religious trauma either together or separately. Do you notice, is there any like common themes around that, or is it sort of the same as individual counseling?
I'd say it's pretty similar. Yeah. I mean, I'm just all about creating space where exploration and questioning and tension can be.
Okay.
And so I'm trying to help couples create that and essentially find that basis or that connection point that really united them probably as a couple.
Okay.
That they coined or, used religious language around, but it probably is a tenet that connected them from the beginning.
Sure. Okay.
So it's really about, like, who are we individually? Who are we as a couple? Can that exist outside of this umbrella of religion? Do we want it to?
Yeah.
And, what is the foundation of why we chose each other?
Yeah.
And because I think for most people, it's there.
Right. Yeah.
I remember saying this in couples counseling with my husband, like, we married each other based on this tenet that we both were Christians. And I was like, that's the foundation of our marriage. And really it wasn't.
Yeah.
But that's what I had told myself.
Right. Yeah.
For however long.
Yeah.
So until I kind of hit that rock bottom and realized, no, it's not. Like, actually, what that means is I value this person as a human being. I love their sense of adventure, and this is who I want my partner to be. But for couples, they might that basis might be incongruent.
Yeah.
And so, really trying to find ways for couples to find each other outside or outside of a religious context. Or if it means they need to uncouple, doing that in a really compassionate, kind, loving way.
That's amazing.
So
I mean, we can relate to that. Yeah, totally. We can relate to that completely because I think we literally had that same conversation. Like,
what's our foundation?
Yeah, because first of all, we're both super disconnected from our own intuition, disconnected from our body, disconnected. I felt like I was disconnected with myself in a way. So I always thought that the reason we were together was because we both loved God. We were both Christians, and that was the foundation of our marriage.
Yeah.
But exactly like you're saying, I feel like we went through all kinds of stuff and had a big breakdown and had to finally come to that point where we could ask the question, like, why are we actually together? And like, if it's because of God, then like, should we stay together or not? And again, either way, maybe it's good to split up, or maybe it's good to stay together. But either way, it's hard to ask that question.
It totally is.
That's what makes it hard. Yeah.
So you said you and your husband did some therapy together.
Yeah.
Did you find that helpful? I'm imagining.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, we did not know how to attend to each other, and what I mean by that is like really be an anchor and be a loving, supportive partner. Out when we walked away from the faith, it was like I don't know. I felt like if we both wanted to pursue our passions, it was like there wasn't space for that. So we just were very emotionally stunted in our relationship. We didn't know how to talk about our own needs in every area. Emotionally, physically, spiritually, sexually. So it was tremendously helpful. Of really building the partnership that we have today.
Sure.
We had to fight for it though. Like the two of you know really intimately.
Yeah.
So it sounds like a lot of couples therapy then would be helping each individual get more in tune with themselves and who they really are, and that way being able to come into a relationship from like two healthy individuals as opposed to one like emotionally bound pair.
Yeah.
I feel like that's what we were taught was healthy when we were religious. Being so codependent.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the word I've been trying to think of this whole time.
Okay, nice.
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
It was threatening for us to exist outside of our partnership.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely was. It seems like selfish and just not Christ-centered and all of those things. Yeah. I think it's interesting to put language to things that are helpful outside. You know, you think there's, like we keep talking about, there's only one way to survive, like in a marriage, and you know, there's only one way to be a healthy person, and like there's so many other things outside of that, and I love like expanding that knowledge now, you know, that we don't have to stick to rigid rules. And like you said, I love finding more and more paths that will work for you, because you can then choose the one that's most helpful for you and makes most sense to you. And I love that freedom because you need a tailor-made path for yourself.
Specifically for you. It's interesting that, at least for me, it didn't feel like freedom at first, you know, when the doors opened and I started to realize, wow, there's like thousands of different ways to live, or thousands of different ways to be in relationship with you, or, you know, tons of different ways to do these things. That felt way more terrifying at first than like some kind of set in stone rule book of do this, this.
Yeah.
It's like taken a while to grow into that freedom, to like actually experience that as freedom, as opposed to experiencing it as some like really scary big thing we have to overcome or figure out or whatever.
Absolutely.
So living in the gray, I guess, is like really terrifying.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's developmentally, it's an advanced skill that our brain has to acquire. And if you think back to, you know, all of us, well, I shouldn't say such all-encompassing language, but for like me, my development intellectually and like with critical thinking really stopped with black and white. And I mean, so that's actually a natural progression for us to be able to tolerate dichotomies and, you know, where things are seemingly opposing, that there can be space for both. And so I think it's really common what you're saying, where it's terrifying. You open the door and you're like, oh shit.
Yeah, let's close that door again.
Stay inside.
Wow.
Okay, so I have one more question. Do you have any like advice or tips to someone who's searching for a therapist, and like any ways that they could go about doing it? Say they're like nervous about the process, I guess, and like how to find someone who's right for them.
Totally. That's a great question. You know, I would say, obviously these are just my thoughts, so take it with a grain of salt, but I would say look for somebody that is committed to honoring your experience.
Okay.
And honoring the meaning that you made out of it, and will provide a container for you to sit in exploration, to sit in questioning, to sit in ambiguity. You know, if somebody causes you to feel shame about your own experience, I would really sit with that and question that. Like, you know, I really think people that are coming out of adverse religious experiences need a space where they can feel permission to slowly untie every single box that we've carried and still be held. And that just takes somebody skilled at holding space for wherever you are at. And I think for some people, it really feels safer to be with somebody who has done their own deconstruction process and work specifically with that. And for some people, they don't need that. You know, I would say it doesn't have to be reserved for people that have had their own internal experience. I think that can be a major asset. But only if that therapist has done their own work. So, you know, if you feel like you are being pressured into making a conclusion or a belief statement, or feel shame about wherever you're at, you know, those are things to pay attention to. Because it's like I think you had said, Joe, that to me, this is all about reclaiming your intuition and your voice and your self-knowledge, intellectually, emotionally, and physically. And that's what I would want for people. A space where they can do all of that and somebody to help them do that. So
that makes sense.
So there's like a number of therapists that I'm aware of all throughout the States that work with religious trauma. Do you mind if I just give them a shout out?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, my partner in crime, who Kayla Felton and I have started Reclamation Collective, which is a support resource for people who've experienced adverse religious experiences. And we are going to be publishing a list of therapists that we have vetted kind of based on their experience with trauma.
Amazing.
And that will be on our website here really shortly.
Okay. We'll put a link to that.
And
Awesome.
what is the
stuff,
website?
It's reclamationcollective.org, I think.
.org. Okay.
But I'll give it to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we'll be adding to that as more and more therapists kind of come out of the woodwork. And that will also be a future resource for clinicians and people who identify with religious trauma.
Cool.
Brian Peck, he is out in Idaho. He is an amazing, amazing therapist, and he has a practice called Room to Thrive. He's very active on social media.
Okay.
And then Laura Anderson is down in Nashville, and she is an amazing marriage and family therapist too that specializes in working with trauma, specifically adverse religious experiences. And then there's some more people in the cities area that I'm familiar with too. So
Sure.
I would say look for somebody that, is going to be honoring of your experience, and check out Reclamation Collective's site for a list of vetted therapists.
That's amazing.
And give yourself a shout out too. Where can people find you?
Sure.
What's your website?
Yeah, my name is Kendra Snyder, and my website is kendrasnydertherapy.com. And it's just SNYDER, so kendrasnydertherapy.com.
Nice.
And you work with people just in the Twin Cities, or do you do online therapy as well?
Yeah, I am licensed in Minnesota and Colorado, so I can work with people that are residents of either of those two states, either with telehealth or in person.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for
This
meeting
has
with
been
us
great.
today.
I feel like
you.
I got so much out of just
So did
having this
I.
conversation with you.
Oh.
Yeah.
We came to therapy today.
I know, yeah.
And we brought you all with us.
Yeah.